But a designer, when they look at the world right now in this moment, they think of what could be, what else is there, right? And a good
What
example of
else?
that is, have you ever been to a design conference and a bunch of UX people get in an elevator? The first thing they do is look at the buttons and comment on how bad the design the buttons were, right? But somebody who's a linear thinking is like, that's how it is. That's the elevator, right? But designers are trying to redesign the world around them all the time, including elevator buttons
All the
all the
time.
time. And it pisses people off. Do you annoy people with that mindset? You're like, oh, this could be better. That could be better. And Jim, that's the word. This is
Right.
how it is. I'm like, no, that's not how it is. That's not how it has to be. It could be improved, right?
Right.
Right. Blessing and a curse at the same time.
Hey, Jim, thank you so much for joining me on BlatzChatz. I am honored to
Mhm.
have you here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I enjoy speaking with you, and I'm honored to be on BlatzChatz.
Cool, thanks. Jim, for the very few who may not know who you are, take a minute and tell us who you are. And I'd love to also hear your story about how you got into
Okay.
UX.
Yeah, so I'm Jim Kalbach. I'm the author of several books, including the Jobs to Be Done Playbook and Mapping Experiences. There it is. Yes. Also, Collaborative Intelligence. You got two of the five. Yeah, that's great. But that work is really the result of my decade and a half time that I spent in design and innovation teams, both internally at large organizations, externally as in an agency, kind of as a consultant. So I've been around and I've seen various aspects of design and innovation. But I'm now the chief evangelist at Mural, one of the leading digital whiteboards. And I took a shift in my career when I moved into the previous role that I had here, which was heading up our customer success team. So I kind of moved from the product side of things over to go to market side of things, which was really interesting. It still has to do with experience, right? Because there's a customer experience there, but I just wasn't designing screens and, using a different medium to design experiences like webinars and enablement sessions and things like that. But it was really eye-opening to me to be on the go-to-market side of things, I think. And then when the pandemic hit, I moved into my current role, which is Chief Evangelist, which kind of puts me out front and I advocate and I promote. I'm not just a promoter. I promote ideas. I like to say I evangelize ideas. I don't sell a product. I sell ideas.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that that happens with a lot of people. Your career
Mhm.
progresses and kind of migrates and changes
Yeah.
as you just go on, right?
Yeah, and somehow it all makes sense in your own mind, like from the inside. You're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. But then when you look at it on paper, people go, wow, you went from that to that to that, and it doesn't make sense. But then you take what you learned, in different fields and disciplines with you, and that helps inform you in different ways that maybe are not so obvious on a LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of people don't know about me that I actually came from journalism.
Right.
So my first job was designing newspapers
Yeah.
and doing press checks and working till midnight. And that job right there taught me discipline
Right.
because there is no putting off a deadline. If
Right.
you put off a deadline, there's going to be a big blank hole in paper, right?
Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
So I've gone from designing very quickly daily publication to user experience design. And then I kind of got more excited about doing the research and learning about the problems than coming up with the solutions for the
Right.
problems. So that's kind of how I migrated over into research in the end.
Yeah. Well, I have two master's degrees, and the first one was in music. So I first studied music. I have a master's degree in music theory and composition. And, even that kind of work, well, obviously it helped form who I am, now professionally. Right. And I was just speaking about this recently on another podcast. And the idea of creativity and openness and starting from a blank piece of paper, which is when you compose a piece of music, you start from a blank piece of paper. Right. So the ability to embrace uncertainty and things like that. There are a lot of latent skills and approaches and perspectives that I learned from my time in music school, right? And after that, though, my second master's degree was in information science. which then led me to ultimately to information architecture, right? So, and that's how then I got into, in the early 2000s, that's how I got into, web design and application design and things like that. And that was a natural progression there too. But my musical training, and, I still play an instrument and things like that, I think that helps round me out professionally as well too.
Tell me a little bit more about how you think that rounds you out.
Yeah. I think to some degree it's a mindset. When we look at like design thinking in the business world, I think Tim Brown wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review, the famous one with the turtleneck person on the cover, right? Design thinking matters for business or whatever it is. And he lays out some very high level principles of design thinking, which I can't remember all of them. I think there's about 5 of them in that article. But it's things like exploring problems before you go to solve them, right? And considering many options and that kind of thing. And you know what? When you write a piece of music, it's the same mindset. If I'm composing a piece of music, I'm essentially designing sound for human consumption, right? Ultimately it's a design activity. It's a human endeavor to structure intent so that somebody else can make sense of what I had in my mind. It's about communication through, in this case, sounds. So what is digital product design, right? It's the design of pixels on a screen that conveys some intent so that humans can conceive it. So just that idea of, I call it nonlinear thinking. And a lot of businesses and business school and the suits compared to the turtlenecks, they want to think in a linear process. Spreadsheets, what's the first step? What's the second step? Is it done? Check. When's a piece of music done? Well, I have a version of it, but it can always, morph and things like that. And when's a design done? There's versions of it and it can always change and be improved as well. So I just think that nonlinear thinking is something that I brought with me all the time. Then when the turtlenecks bump up against the suits, they're always like, "What? Are you crazy? What are you doing?" I know. Yeah, right. And when I mentioned that I moved to the go-to-market side of things here at Mural, I was actually on the executive leadership team for about 5 years as well, helping make not the ultimate strategic decisions or financial decisions, but I was part of that group of people doing that. And I was very often an alternative voice in the mix. Everybody would go, oh, I think this, that, and everybody would nod. And of course, because the assumption of the linear thinking business world is, yes, of course, we want to grow revenue, blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, no, let's create value for, or whatever the monkey wrench would be that I'd throw in there. And I think those monkey wrenches that came to me naturally came all the way back from my creative time as a musician and then as a UX designer, and then sitting around a table with business leaders. It was interesting for me because coming out of a lot of design teams, there's assumptions that design teams have about what's good and what's not, and there's assumptions that marketing has and assumptions that business leaders have. And then I got exposed to some of those in a very direct way, and I realized, oh, I think differently about problems than a lot of business leaders.
Yeah, that's so true. I was working a little bit as a researcher for the
Yeah,
go-to-market team at a company that was releasing a credit card, and it really was
yeah,
different. You assume everybody thinks like
yeah.
we do, and they question assumptions, and they're like, "Wait, this is a development. We should check that out." We think that they also think that way, and I was finding that was not
No,
the
no, it's
case.
not. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I see that all the
Yeah.
time. They'll talk about performance of a piece of content, and it's really measured in volume, number of clicks, number of eyeballs that come in there. And I'm like, yeah, but did you see the comments on that LinkedIn post that, so and so jumped in there, somebody famous or whatever, Jeff Gotthelf kind of, recognition commented on that. And I'm like, isn't that great? And they're like, shrug. Yeah,
Who?
who? And yeah, but this underperformed. I'm like, oh, your understanding of performance of a piece of content is very different than mine, right? That's just an example of different sets of assumptions between, a designerly like mindset like me and you versus marketing. The one that most of us, UX designers have come across is an engineering mindset versus a UX mindset as well, too. And they want black and white. Is it done? Does it work? That kind of thing. And this swimming around at the fuzzy front end of things isn't comfortable for them. But going back to the point I made, my creative upbringing as a musician and close to the arts and things, I'm very comfortable in the squiggly line to the left. You ever see that diagram? There's a squiggly line, and then it straightens out. Like, yeah, give me all the
Yeah.
squiggle. I thrive up there. But a lot of businesses don't like that because business likes certainty, right? And
Yeah.
I grew up professionally embracing uncertainty, right?
Right. And it being okay, and you have the space to do
That's right.
that.
Not only is it okay, I prefer it. I don't want a playbook
Right.
where I'm just turning pages and checking boxes and then entering my output in a spreadsheet. I don't want that. I want to know what I don't know, and I want to know what the world hasn't done yet. My definition of a designer at one point, it's part of a definition of a designer is that you look at the world as it currently is. Somebody who thinks linear thinks that's how it is. But a designer, when they look at the world, and right now in this moment, they think of what could be, what else is there, right? And a good
What
example of
else?
that is, have you ever been to a design conference and a bunch of UX people get in an elevator? The first thing they do is look at the buttons and comment on how bad the design the buttons were, right? But somebody who's a linear thinking is like, that's how it is. That's the elevator, right? But designers are trying to redesign the world around them all the time, including elevator buttons
All the
all the time. And it pisses people off. Do you annoy people with that mindset? You're like, oh, this could be better.
time.
That could be better. And Jim, that's the word. This is
Right.
how it is. I'm like, no, that's not how it is. That's not how it has to be. It could be improved,
Right.
right? Right.
Oh, every time. Yes. Once you're in that mindset, you can't
You can't
unsee
unsee.
bad
That's
design.
right. You can't unsee it.
It's it's
It's a
everywhere.
blessing and a curse at the same time.
It is. And you're so right about the
Yeah,
elevator
yeah,
comments.
yeah,
We're thinking it every time we step
yep.
in, but we're usually not surrounded with
That's right.
people
That's right.
where someone will be like, "Oh my God, why did they put
Yeah.
the three next to the one?"
Right.
And we're like,
Exactly. Right.
"Exactly."
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
If you are finding value in today's video, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification so that you don't miss any future content from BlatzChatz.
And sometimes the answers are
Yeah.
simple too. It's like, well, if they just switch these buttons, it would be way more easier, right? But then other people are like, yeah, but they're not switched. That's how it is. Just press the button you want to go to and go back to your room and don't think about it. But we're redesigning the elevator in our head, even all the way to our room, right? Right.
Oh, that's so true. Oh, I feel that
Yeah.
absolutely. You said something earlier about like how many clicks did we get?
Mhm.
And it made me think of a project I was working on for a human resources website. And they measured success by how many clicks an article, or yeah, I guess it was an article got. And I'm thinking, yes, but did it provide the information that they
Right. Yeah.
needed? And they didn't
Right. Yeah.
care.
Well, was there learning involved? From my standpoint as an evangelist, right? I don't want to count the eyeballs. What I want to count is the number of people that I influenced or impacted or changed their thinking. And I'd rather have 10 important people or well-known people or like customer champions. I'll just say that from the Mural standpoint. Like I'd rather have 10 people that are key in our accounts, our current accounts, be influenced by that content than 10,000 random eyeballs. Like I'm pretty extreme. Those 10 people are orders of magnitude more important to me than just random passerbys.
I absolutely agree. Like to my article example,
Mhm.
right? Did that provide the info they
Yeah.
needed? Did they have to go to other
Yep.
articles? How much more time did we waste because this article
Yep.
was only one of
Yep.
five that they went through, or they ended up giving up and going to Google,
Yep. Right.
right?
Yeah.
But they don't
It
care.
doesn't. It didn't matter. Yeah, I know. But it's a different
Yeah,
perspective,
it's
and
kind of
it's
that.
we could poke holes in it, from our perspective, but sometimes that's not healthy as well too, because there is a reason for counting clicks and things like that as well too. Having come from that side of the world, the people that stand in an elevator and try to redesign the buttons, and then going into these other worlds, development, marketing, business leadership, and noticing that there's a different set of base assumptions that I would characterize as based on more linear type thinking. There's value in that approach as well too. So it's not necessarily just saying like, oh, they don't get it. You know, I've said that in my career. You probably said it in your career. Everybody listening has said they don't get it. And it's like, yeah, but you know what? You don't get their perspective either. Right. So for me, it's all about balance. And I believe a lot of organizations are kind of blind to other perspectives and don't, in a curious way, don't try to go out and get other types of data, feedback, information and blend it a little more. So I'm more of a, yeah, okay, let's count the eyeballs and the clicks and all that kind of things. But we also want the hearts in as well, too, just to compare body parts. Is it eyeballs and fingers clicking, or is it hearts and minds? And I think we need both. I think you need both. But what I see is a far imbalance in the other direction. It's a numbers game. And I think that needs to be balanced is my key word.
I think that's fair. I'll take one more stab because it's kind of fun. Also, those measures of clicks is easy to measure.
Right, yeah.
So it's that back to that linear thinking, checking the box, right?
It's and it's the question, are we measuring the things that really matter? Like, did learning take place? Was there an influence or impact of this content? Is hard to measure. So I find that, you know, there's a tendency to measure what you can measure and then make that your cornerstone. Is like, yeah, but there's many, many other important things you're not measuring because you can't, or it's very, very difficult, right? So then you end up making decisions based on what you can measure easily.
Right. And is that the best way?
Right.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So I wonder, Jim, for maybe some designers who haven't had the opportunity to kind of climb up in their career ladder and have that exposure directly to business and linear thinking, how might seniors, middleweight designers and researchers, UX pros, how might we adopt more of that mindset of balance and meeting them in the middle?
Yeah, I don't think it's pounding your fist on the table and saying you don't get it or they don't get it. Like empathy, like do an empathy map on that stakeholder. Think about what pressures do they have and what are they reporting. And even though there's a systemic problem with that, is understanding that first, I think is important, right? What motivates these people? And the one thing that I've learned, that if I were to go back as a UX designer, the one word that I would use a lot more, like I'd use it as punctuation in my speech, is the word growth, right? Very often UX is about delight and pleasant experiences. And it's no, there's no business value in delight. You got to say grow. Everything, if you want to grow your businesses, people have to get through this sequence of screens. I'm just kind of making that up. That will help you grow. You'll earn more money. That will help you grow. And I would just use the word growth all the time, because that's what people want to hear, growth. And sometimes I hear that a lot, particularly from the sales side. Sometimes it's fantasy. Hey, we want to grow X number of dollars this quarter, and it's growth. And they're just saying it too, and then they don't get there, and oh, whoops, we missed our target, right? So just overusing growth is what I would do as a UX designer. I'm not a UX designer anymore, by the way, just as a quick aside.
But I think that's a good perspective, because if you think about it, Jim, we as UX folks have the opportunity to create growth through deliverables or experiences. Totally. Where a salesperson, no offense, and I'm not a salesperson, so I don't really know what auto magical things they can do for growth, but we can actually create things that can lead to growth.
Yes. However, the traditional business mindset is that growth comes from sales and marketing, because it's revenue growth come from sales and marketing. Now, recently, there's been a movement that growth can come from the product, and it's called product-led growth, PLG. We've probably heard of that. If you haven't heard about PLG, you need to look at PLG, because for me, that is the expression of what UX was ultimately about, is growing through the product experience. So for me, I think UX has failed to serve businesses and tell them what to do from a business standpoint. And when I got into UX 25 years ago, almost now, 2000, I guess, it was a bigger umbrella than it is now. Like we talked about offline experiences, physical product experiences. We talked about brand experience. We were talking about a lot more. And I feel that UX has contracted. And the sign of that for me is the UI/UX job description. We're looking for a UI/UX designer. And that UI part of it for me is like, well, no, that's small UX, right? We used to be big UX. So I feel the domain of UX has gotten smaller over the past 2 decades so that it is digital product designers and it's about interface design, which is not unimportant. That's great. But I think UX had the potential to be a bigger thing, but it didn't. That void was filled by PLG now. And you've probably seen it, Jen. UX designers calling themselves growth designers. Go out on LinkedIn and look
I
for a
have.
job title called growth designer. And I'm like, every UX designer is a growth designer. They just haven't positioned it that way in the past. So I would encourage anybody to look at growth. Yeah, start talking about growth and really get into PLG stuff. If you read the definitions of PLG, 80% of it is UX design, if not more. It's basically PLG is a relabeling of what I remember UX to be back in the day, the big UX. It's relabeled now as PLG, and it's not being led by designers. It's other folks that are driving. So I think UX really missed the opportunity to own that part of the value of design. And now PLG is suddenly everybody's talking about PLG. Business leaders, board members, CEOs, they're all talking about PLG. That's what I would have wished for UX. And PLG came in and ate our cake.
Why do you think that happened? How did PLG come in and take everything over?
I think because the positioning, labels. And everybody's, oh, labels don't matter. And it's like, yeah, I get that argument. And I kind of feel the same way as well, too. But at some level, they do matter. And the word design, I've learned, is a very, very loaded word. And as much as we've tried to take apart the nuances of that word, capital D versus a lowercase d, design, and design thinking, design is problem solving, and it's all this blah, 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 blah. That the word, when you say the word design to a business stakeholder who hasn't had that sensitivity to the word and the distinctions in it, they just think surface level aesthetics. Design is surface level aesthetics. So that's just an example of the words and the language that we use to position UX as an important field. I use the word delight as well, too. It's like, we want to delight our customers. If instead we said, we want to architect a solution that will help grow, right? And behavior change, persuasive design, and think different words like that. But for me, out of all of those different kind of positioning and label changes, it's the word growth. It's in PLG. It's product-led growth. And if we said design-led growth, the thing about PLG is interesting too, is not only did they come in and take our cake, is that the metaphor? Take our lunch, eat our lunch? Eat our lunch. Yeah, they ate our lunch. They went backwards, right? Because it took us so long to say, it's not about the product, it's about the experience. And the experience is the product. So I'm like, why are we going back to product-led growth? It should be experience-led growth, ELG, right?
Yeah.
So there's an opportunity for a UX designer to stand up and go ELG or XLG. Oh yeah, there you go, even sexier. XLG, experience-led growth, right? Right?
I love it.
Yeah.
That could be. I feel like there's a book coming on for you,
No,
Jim.
I have other books in my mind. You kind of write books in your mind, right? Which is the easy part, by the way. Just as another aside, if you've never written a book, the easy part is thinking it up. The hard part is sitting down every day and writing sentence after sentence. And I don't like writing books, actually. People are like, oh, you're going to write another book? I hate writing books. So it's very painful. Painful thing. But yeah, that could be a XLG, right? Experience-led growth.
I love it. I agree, Jim. And I think something like it has taken us back a little bit, focusing on the product, because then you get businesses who just want to spew out features.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Instead of actually meeting a need.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. And PLG.
And so, yeah.
PLG, if you look at the definitions and language around PLG, it's essentially UX, and they do say the word need, but then you're like, wait, you have an MBA And you previously worked as a sales enablement consultant, and you're running our PLG program talking about user needs. And it's like, wow, the UX crowd here, the designerly crowd, hopefully listening, still listening. This is a long one, isn't it? Still listening is like way more capable and qualified to understand human behavior, in my opinion. So there's a mismatch there, and it's like, how do we let that get away? I don't know how that happened.
Yeah. It's kind of the clash between product folks and UX folks a little
Yeah, a
bit.
little bit. Yeah, it's in there too. So I think, yeah, playing nice with others, and adopting some of their positioning. And the reason why we care about the user experience and user needs, I think ultimately it is an avenue or a path to growth. We want more people clicking on our screens or persuasively taking the actions that we want them to, right? You're not a UX designer because it's an artistic personal expression. Is you work for an organization, you get paid, and you're trying to help that business grow. Right? That ultimately that's what we know, but at least I never expressed it that way as a UX designer. I was always talking about delight and usability and smooth experience, seamless end-to-end experience. Sounds great, but seamless end-to-end experience for growth. Again, just using the word growth, reframing everything that we believe as UX designers as a mechanism for growth, I think would help reposition it as that PLG movement that ate our lunch.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You talked a little bit, Jim, about the contraction of the UX world and using that UX/UI. I'm seeing that more and more in job titles. And I think that's just because that's what recruiters are trained to look for. So kind of meeting them where they are, right? I kind of feel like the industry and hiring managers or companies are looking for is more swaying toward that UI side of things now. What do you
I
think?
see that. I believe that as well too, which again is not bad. Graphic design, interaction design, information architecture. If you're an expert crafts person in those things, that's great. That's fantastic. And maybe we don't need UX designers. I think we need UX like as a field but maybe we don't need UX people. Maybe it's just better product managers and better business decisions that we need, and we don't need the UX people. Maybe.
Well, I mean, that's a thought,
Yeah.
but I think keeping the UX folks, going back to what you said earlier, we kind of throw a wrench in the linear thinking, right?
Yes, correct.
I don't know that product
Yeah,
folks always do
correct.
that. I think they're a little bit more that business mindset.
I agree.
Deadline, get this
I
done.
agree.
And somebody needs to go,
Yeah,
wait,
that's right.
why?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I see this in my current job. A symptom that I see of lots of teams and organizations is they get a challenge, a new strategy, whatever that is, and the first thing they say is, "What's the solution?" And then the first best thing that comes to mind gets documented, requirements, and then built. And then you're sitting there going, "What other things did you explore?" Right? And those are the people that see the elevator buttons and say that's it. But we're like, no. There's 6 other alternatives. There's a dozen other alternatives that we need to explore. I'm not talking about heavy upfront research that's going to slow you down, but is actually going to help you go faster because you're going to have fewer do-overs and less idea churn later on and more alignment later on as well too. But this idea of going from a challenge, what's the solution? That's what a lot of people do. I think what it does is it causes businesses and organizations to miss potential opportunities in the name of velocity, and they miss growth opportunities in the name of let's ship it, that kind of thing. So you're right. Yeah, it's a mindset. Ultimately, it's a mindset, I think, that you need to have. And, to be honest with you, some UI designers don't necessarily have that, which again is not a problem. Right? If you're the best graphic designer or interaction designer, that's fine. We need that as well too. But you're right. You do need people who are more strategic and can sit at a peer group of decision makers and go, well, we need to explore other options. We need to understand the actual human need better. and those types of things. And that's what a UX designer, I think, should bring to the table.
And what really pisses me off about that is this problem has gone on for years and it's not getting any
You
better.
don't think so? Sometimes I talk to people and they
don't.
say, yeah, I think it's getting better. Yeah.
I think a little bit. It might be okay. Now you can do a little research and understanding needs rather than the solution. I think there's a maybe 25% pause now, a little bit. But it's like, it's almost like, all right, you can go explore two things within 2.5 hours.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. No, yeah, you're right. It's just enough to get over the hurdle and, you know, pat yourself on the back and it's like, I'm customer centric. I did the design thinking thing. I'm customer centric. Okay, let's move on. Right. Yeah.
Right. We have a deadline to meet, and it's still the same as it was.
Customer centricity check. Okay, what's the next one? Right.
Yes, just sprinkle a little UX on it, right?
Yeah, right.
I do think it is getting a little better, but it's not
where it needs.
It's not customer centric.
I mean, that's the challenge, though. I mean, some people say just run away from that organization. If they don't get it, just run away from that organization. And I think, no, that's the problem to solve, right? Is we want, both for ourselves and our careers, we want companies to be more human centric so that there are solutions out there that address a real need, not only a human need, but societal need as well, too, doing good for society. And so, yeah, I don't think running away is the solution. Is like, that's the challenge, is to help people adopt a different mindset. I think that's really the real big role, actually. It's not about cranking out. And that's why I totally agree with you. That's why I always cringe when I see UI UX designer, because I'm like, they just want somebody to build screens. They don't want to change their lifestyle, their mindset, or their perspectives, right? I believe that. I really believe that's what's needed.
I agree. Yeah. And I think with a lot of layoffs and changes in priorities and whatnot, I think it's coming back down to what can you output? And the output is a screen.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yep.
And it's like, you can call yourself whatever you want, but that screen better come out by 4 o'clock today.
Yeah. But, you know, that's part of, we talked about assumptions. And one place where my mind has been recently for many years now is the nature of an organization and how they're run. And whether we like it or not, a lot of those assumptions that we were talking about from businesses in general, business leadership, a lot of those assumptions actually come from the industrial era, right? It's what's the unit productivity is inputs and outputs. But if we live in a time where the input is creativity and the output is human experience, it's like, wait, why are you using management techniques from a factory to manage those types of people? Right. And, you know, this type of thinking for me was influenced a lot by Frederick Laloux. I don't know if you've heard of his name. He wrote a book called Reinventing Organizations. Frederick Laloux. And he talks about, over the history of humanity, actually, he goes way back in time, that there are these articulation points, like the Renaissance, industrial era. And with each one of those points in times, the nature and the definition of an organization also changes. So he's got a progression from what he calls red organizations, which is kind of more like a feudal system, you know, wolf pack kind of thing, to yellow, orange, green, and then these teal organizations, which you hear examples of these, which are self-organizing and self-managing or companies, organizations. Unfortunately, we still live in an orange world where particularly any international corporation on the stock market is going to be run like an orange organization, which is top-down hierarchy, decisions come down, financial pressure to report every quarter back to the board, all of those types of things. But I think this might be a little too grand for your podcast here, but I think a lot of the issues around why isn't UX more embraced, why isn't nonlinear thinking more embraced, I think is because of the organization itself, the nature and the assumptions of the organization. It's really, really hard to change that, right, and fight against that. And that's why, to some degree, I mentioned that I'm not a UX designer anymore, but I like to think that I'm looking at that issue more, is like, how can we get leadership decision making to be different so that UX organizations are more successful? Because if you look at it, a lot of those UI designers that will apply for the UX slash UI slash UX design, they're really, really good designers. We have a lot of good UI designers, and I would even say UX designers. So why is UX so bad out in the world? What's the gap between all of this skill and craft and what we see in the world? And for me, it's the organization gets in its own way and sabotages that.
Absolutely. I can totally see that. Well, thanks, Jim, for giving me another damn book to
I
read
know.
and put on my to-do list. Great, another book, just what I thought I was getting down. No, I agree. Well, first of all, that book sounds amazing. And the analogies that you gave is absolutely, I feel that pain too. It is the organizations, the hierarchy, the history, getting in its own way. And that's where I'm like, even if it's a new leader comes in, it's like, yes, we're going to be user centric. And you're like, yay, finally. But then you might get a little bit of give. You might get like invited earlier in the process. In other words, we buy a lot of third-party vendors. You might actually get to be part of that vetting process, where before UX was never part of that. You might be brought in now. That's a huge win. But if you give a recommendation and say, no, we actually should not buy this, and they do it anyways, where are you?
Yeah, it's a very slow process, but I believe we're in a transitional stage in the world in general. I think the pandemic actually accelerated some of these transitional kind of emotions that hopefully will continue here. But as a UX designer, I think you have to accept a lot of things. The systematic kind of, endemic to the system decision making habits, that you need to accept those and recognize when to push back and when not to. Choose your battles.
Yeah. I think, gosh, I wish there was a playbook. I mean, there's jobs to be done in the book. We'll have to
that probably won't help you
I
with
wish
that.
there was I know. I wish there was a playbook that could help with this, because this is a universal problem. I don't know a UX designer that isn't struggling with getting their voice heard, having influence. But to your point, it's not linear. Every organization is different. What will work for one person or one team or one company won't apply to the next.
Yeah.
Woo! There is so much good stuff here with Jim. I think I'm going to have to break this into 2 parts. I love this conversation with Jim. He had so much insight on things beyond that UX and UI job title. Isn't this gold? If you found value in this interview with Jim, give me a like and let me know that you appreciated it.